I'm Lauren from tastypc.tv, and today I'm doing a review of the Fractal Design Arc Mini R2 Micro-ATX case. Now, seeing as I've already done a review of the original Arc Mini, in this video I'm focusing mainly on the differences between the two cases, and on this case's water cooling abilities. So let's get started. So starting at the front of the case, it's plastic but with this really nice brushed aluminium effect, which I do actually prefer to normal metal, I think, because, you know, not only is the front panel still solid and strong, but you don't have the issues of like fingerprints and stuff that you would do if it was metal. But the first thing you notice is that the engraved Fractal Design logo is moved from the top. We've now got this really shiny silver one here on the dust filter. And unlike the original Arc Mini, to get to the dust filter, you don't have to pull off the front panel and remove the fans. You can now just unclick this like that, and I do really like that they've done that. I think it's a massive upgrade from the original Arc Mini. But just like before, we've got kind of the like spongy, velcro-y dust filter, which I do prefer to normal mesh dust filters, and that reveals space for two 120mm fans, which use screws rather than the clip design that the original Arc Mini did. And, you know, even though I like the clips, this just allows you to better secure a radiator to the front of the case. But obviously you can still remove the entire front panel, the same as with the original Arc Mini. Just pull it from the bottom. And you can see that Fractal Design have included a 120mm fan. I should probably point out the two 5.25-inch optical bays as well. And you might notice that these 4 screws, which along with 6 others, you can remove to allow you to remove the optical bays, which I will talk to you more about when we get further into the video. So then onto the top of the case, firstly starting with the front I/O. This bit's the same as the original Arc Mini, with the restart button, headphone, microphone jacks on the on button, with the power LED. But this bit's different to the original Arc Mini, which had 2 USB 2 ports and 1 USB 3 port, whereas this has got 2 USB 3 ports and an inbuilt fan controller, which is powered by Modex and can control up to 3 fans to either 5, 7 or 12 volts. Now, the original Arc Mini came with a PCI expansion slot fan controller, which looked pretty messy, and I don't imagine anyone actually used it, whereas I can definitely see a lot of people using that, so I think it's a much better implementation. But with the top panel, you can remove it just by doing these two, these two thumb screws, and it just slides straight off. And this has got the same kind of spongy, velcro-y dust filter that you've got at the front of the case. Now, I know some people don't like this, having like a dust filter at the top of the case, and they don't like how it looks, but I personally really like it. I think having the fan mounts covered makes the case just look so much better, and it also matches the front. But you do have 2 140mm fan mounts and 3 120mm fan mounts, which means that you can fit 360 rad if you remove the optical cage. And also, because, you know, the fan mounts are offset, it means that you can fit much thicker radiators than you otherwise would be able to. But I am going to cover rad options later on in the video. So in the back and the bottom of the Arc Mini R2 is exactly the same as with the original Arc Mini. We've got the 2 water cooling grommeted holes, 120mm fan mount with included fan, obviously a hole for your rear O shield, 4 PCIe mounts and a 5th one for a fan controller, and obviously your power supply hole. But then we've also got a removable dust filter which just slides out. This covers your power supply intake as well as a mount for a fan at the bottom of your case if you want one there. But this is mesh, unlike the dust filter at the top and the front. We've got the same sexy metal feet with rubber bottoms, the only exception being these 4 screws, which allow you to remove the bottom hard drive cage, which we weren't able to do with the original Arc Mini. But once again, I'll talk to you about that later in the video. So the original Arc Mini shipped with a plain side panel with a fan mount for either one 120 or one 140mm fan. And even though I know that some people do prefer their side panels to have fan mounts, the vast majority of people prefer windowed side panels, me included. So the Arc Mini R2 ships with this really nice shaped tinted windowed side panel, which I do think is a massive upgrade from the original Arc Mini. And you do just undo these 2 thumb screws and it slides straight off. So taking a look inside the case, this is just going to be like a really quick initial look where I cover some of the basics. Then what I'm going to do is chuck a rig straight in it, probably look at server build, a load of hard drives, maybe H100i, at which point I'll cover things like graphics card, power supply clearance, any issues I had fitting the system, etc. At which point I'll remove the H100i and cover all of the different radiator options that are possible with this rig, you know, taking out the optical bays, hard drive cages, kind of showing you the space you've got to work with and what's really possible with this case. But until then, I'll just start with the basics. So obviously it's a Micro-ATX case, and you can fit either Micro-ATX or Mini-ATX motherboards. You've got 165mm clearance for CPU coolers. So obviously we've got the 2 5.25-inch optical bays, and you can see 2 more of the screws to allow you to remove them, but I'll cover that later. We've got 2 hard drive cages, each with 3 hard drive trays, which just slide out, and you can fit either 3.5 inch or 2.5 inch hard drives or solid state drives. And these have got like little rubber stands to help isolate your hard drive's vibrations. Now both of the hard drive cages are removable to allow for a radiator at the front of the case. The bottom one using the 4 screws I showed you before, this middle one using these 2 thumb screws. Now you can either remove it completely if you want, or you can put it back in like this, which I suppose just better like directs air over your hard drives and onto your graphics card. Now if you do have it removed, you've got kind of this left behind, which does look a little bit silly, but you do have 4 screws underneath it to allow you to move it from the optical bays, which is pretty cool. So here we've got space to mount a 120mm fan, although having that there may cause you some clearance issues with the power supply or the power supply cables, but once again I'll cover that once I've got a rig fitted. One thing I would like to mention though is that all of the fans, and well, all of the included fans, unlike the fan controller and the USB cables and stuff, are all black, and even the fan cables are braided, which I do think is a really nice touch. But I think that's all I'm going to cover for now, so I'm going to put a rig in it. So I have now built a system inside the Arc Mini R2, although I should probably mention this is just a review build. I'm not actually going to be using it, and for that reason I've done things slightly differently and used different parts than I otherwise would if I was going to be using it myself. So starting at the top of the case, for the cooler, I've mounted a H100i in the roof. Now I don't know if I made it obvious earlier, but even though you can fit 2 140mm fans in the roof with the optical bays in, you can't fit a rad and fans, so you couldn't, for example, fit a H110 and still keep the optical bays. Also another issue, which was the same with the original Arc Mini, is clearance for this rear fan, because with the tubes going up this way and the end tank up here, you can't fit a standard 25mm thick fan, you can only fit one of those slim 15mm ones. However, if I had fitted so the tubes went up to the right, then I wouldn't have the issue and I could fit a standard 25mm 128mm fan. So onto kind of like the middle section, with both of the hard drive cages in, you've got up to roughly 290mm of space to work with for your graphics card, but with them removed you've got up to roughly 425mm. Because the top 2 PCIe slots are in line with the top hard drive cage and the bottom 2 in line with the bottom one, if you don't want to fit a 3 slot card that's longer than 290mm, you will have to get rid of both hard drive cages. Although I was really lucky with this one, because even though the PCB is longer than 290, the cooler just fits, so I was able to keep this bottom one. Also I've just removed these things because I think it just makes it look a little bit neater, I think. So for this build I've gone for an Enermax Revolution87 Plus power supply, pretty much because it's kind of average length, but also because it's so modular, meaning that I cover people who are both going to be using non-modular or people who are going to be using fully modular power supplies. Now Fractal design say if you want to use the bottom 120mm fan mount, you need to use a power supply 170mm or shorter. And this one's 175, and it'd probably be possible to fit a fan at a push if it wasn't for the connectors and cables. So I think to give you enough room for clearance for cables, you're going to want to use a power supply roughly like 160mm. So I'd go for something like this in length, just to kind of give you the space you need for cable managing. But if you aren't bothered about losing this bottom fan mount, then just like with the graphics card, you've got up to 290mm of space to work with, which means that you could fit even like an AX1200i and still have plenty of room for cable management. So taking a look behind the back of the motherboard tray, unfortunately just like with the original Arc Mini, the CPU cutout is slightly higher than it could have been, which can be a bit of a nuisance if you need to swap out your CPU cooler for any reason and need to take off the backplate to do so. If you don't need to swap it out, then it's kind of an easy issue to work around, and if you're going to be using 2011 chipset, then you don't really have an issue at all. But for me, who in a minute is going to take out the H100i and to show you the different radiator options, it is a bit of a nuisance. But Fractal design say you've got 20mm of space for cable management between the motherboard tray and the side panel, and even with my awful cable management job where I've got cables on top of each other and all bunched together, I was still able to get the side panel on. Also, with the original Arc Mini, the cable management grommets were so kind of flimsy. It was so frustrating. You have to be so careful when you put the cables through, they didn't just fly out. But these ones, these ones are so much better. They're stay input, you don't have to worry about them at all, they're so much better. If I was going to try and be picky, I could say that maybe these 2 cable management holes could do with being ever so slightly higher, just to better align with the SATA connectors and the 24-pin cable with this motherboard. but I'm sure there are some motherboards out there where it perfectly aligns. Also, if I was being really picky, I could say maybe chuck in a couple more of these cable tie mount things, maybe like around here, but you know. So one feature that we didn't see with the original Arc Mini is 2 dedicated solid-state drive mounts, and I really love this feature. I really love that these are here, and it's actually a really great mounting system as well, because you just undo these 2 screws, secure your solid-state drive to it, and then just screw it back in. It's much better than, for example, the one that Define R4 had, where you had to screw them into the motherboard tray and you had to fit them before you fit the motherboard. But yeah, I do definitely love this, because I think in this case you're either going to be using it for something like a server, where you're going to have the 6 hard drive trays filled up or with hard drives, or you're going to be water cooling, have the hard drive cages removed, radiator in the front, and you're going to have nowhere to put your solid-state drives. And there has been quite a few water cooling builds now where I've had nowhere to put the solid-state drives and like just double-sided sticky taped it to the back of the optical bays. So it's a great feature regardless of really whether you need kind of somewhere to put your solid-state drives or not, because it just means that, you know, you go from having 6 hard drives or solid-state drives up to 8. So it is a great feature and it's a great mounting method, although obviously if you use them you kind of lose this area for cable management. So what I'm going to do now is partially disassemble this rig to show you the different radiator options you have. Onto the different radiator options you have, firstly leaving the optical bays in. Now the 240 rad mounted into the roof, even with the fan mounts offset to the side like they are, if anything sticks out past about 50mm from the motherboard, so like the Dominator Platinum memory at 55mm, then it will hit into your fans and rad. So if you were going to go for taller memory, you've only got from the start of the memory to the roof of the case, which is only about 65mm, meant you could only fit a 30mm thick rad with a set of standard 25mm fans, or a 45mm thick rad with a set of those slim 15mm fans. However, if you do use shorter memory than that, such as low profile memory, and you're careful with things like the clearance of your motherboard and your CPU cable, then you can theoretically run radiators as thick as you want in the roof, up to where your graphics card starts. Because even if you do end up covering things like the hole in your block, because of the offset fan mounts, you actually have space between your radiator and the block to run things like tubing and the fittings. And with my little example loop here, I'm using an Alphacool Monster Rad and a Phobya UC2 Plexi block, and I've got roughly 35mm of space to work with, which was enough for me to be able to fit a Monsoon 1610 90-degree rotary fitting and a straight compression fitting. And Monsoon fittings are slightly bigger than your average fittings. I was able to, because I went for low profile memory, was able to run a 1610 tube between the rad and the memory from the block to the res. So, you know, as long as you are careful with the parts that you go for, you do kind of plan it beforehand, you check for any clearance issues, etc, etc, then you can, you know, go as thick as you want. The only reason why I didn't add in a second set of fans here was purely because I wanted to make it easier on myself getting this tube here from the rad up into the res. I don't know if you can see that, but if I had more time to kind of fiddle with it and get in there to fit it, then I would have added a second set of fans and it would have worked fine. So, you know, if you are careful with the parts you use, you do check for clearance issues, etc, etc, then you can fit a thicker rad as you want in the roof of the Arc Mini R2. So at the front of the Arc Mini R2, with the optical base still in but the 2 hard drive cages removed, Fractal design so you've got 272mm to work with for a 240 rad. The issue with this is that, for example, my Alphacool ST30 rad is 278mm, the H100i Radiator is 275mm, and having a quick look around, the smallest radiator, or the shortest I should say, 240 radiator that I could find was a magical slim one at 273mm, so even that being 1mm taller than you can apparently fit there. However, with this thing removed, you can, with a bit of force, fit a H100i into the front. And with the end tank at the top, the screws do line up, I have checked. So, but it did take quite a bit of force to get in there. I mean, it's not screwed in, but it's not going anywhere, and it's going to scratch a little bit, taking it out and putting it in. But if you really wanted a H100i in here with the optical bays in, you could do it. And I suppose for that reason it means that, for example, the magical slim rad would also fit in here, if this one does, but officially speaking you can't fit a 240 rad in the front of the case, which is a little bit disappointing. So I have now removed the optical bays and fitted 280mm radiator in the roof, although as I don't actually have a separate 280 rad, I'm using a H110. But as the radiator is 29mm, it's only 1mm shorter than a standard 30 rad, meaning that I can still use it to show you kind of the clearance you'll have if you're planning on using a 30mm thick 280 rad. But because of how far back the 140mm fan mounts go, you've only got roughly 30mm space between your motherboard and your rad and fans. So because of that reason, if you do want to fit a 280 rad, you have to be very, very careful with the clearance of your motherboard, very careful with your CPU cable. You have to make sure definitely to put it in first before fitting the radiator, otherwise you just won't get it in. And you can only come down to where your memory starts, and there's roughly 65mm space between the roof of the case and where your memory starts, meaning that you can only really fit like a 30mm thick rad with a single set of fans. So even though it is possible to fit a H110 rad in the roof of the Arc Mini R2 with the optical bays removed, you do have to be very careful, like I said, with the motherboard, CPU cable. And then lastly, I've just fit a 360 and a 240mm radiator in the Arc Mini R2. Now this is a monster 360 rad and push, which is pretty epic to fit in a Micro-ATX case. And being a 120mm fan-based rad, obviously this area here, we've got the same clearance space and clearance issues that we saw with the two 240mm rads. Now while it is possible to fit the monster in push-pull, the reason why I've only fit it in push is because if you do fit it in push-pull, then you lose the ability to be able to fit a 240mm radiator in the front of the case. Also, you can't fit the top hard drive cage if, rather than a front rad, you are hoping to use the two hard drive cages. However, in push or pull only, you can fit a radiator at the front or keep the top hard drive cage in. Now this here is an Alphacool 240 UT60, meaning it's 60mm thick, and it just barely fit. Although even if you went for a thinner 360 rad, or you went for like a 240 rad, or you didn't put a rad on the roof at all, it's actually impossible to go for a thicker radiator than this because of where the fan mounts are. Because the length between the radiator holes and the bottom of the rad, because of this copper end cap, actually makes the monster rad too long to fit in the bottom, the bottom end tank, it makes it too long to fit. So even, like I said, even if you didn't have a radiator in the top, you wouldn't be able to fit a monster rad in the front of the case, meaning that the Arc Mini R2 can't fit two monster rads. However, if you did put a second set of fans here, you can still fit the bottom 120mm fan, and you've still got plenty of space for long graphics cards. So moving on to the conclusion, with the original Arc Mini, even though there were some areas where I felt like Fractal design could improve on the case, overall I did really love it, and I used one for quite some time as my personal home file server. But one of the things I was really wanting to do to it but just never got round to was I wanted to drill out the optical bays, the bottom hard drive cage, and cut a grill into the roof to allow you to fit both a 360 and a 240 rad at the same time, but I just never got round to it. So when Fractal Design announced that they were releasing the Arc Mini R2, which had an extended grill to allow for 360 rad, where you could screw out the optical bays and the bottom hard drive cage, I was quite excited for the case, and I did want to get hold of one to see exactly what it could do. And I think the fact that it can fit a monster 360 and a 60mm thick 240 natively in a Micro-ATX case at the same time is just epic, and I think that if you are looking for a Micro-ATX case to water cool in, then this should be at the top of your list of cases to consider. If you don't want the case for water cooling, for example, kind of like a home file server like I did with my original Arc Mini, then it's still a pretty decent case for that. I mean, you've got 6 hard drive bays to allow for hard drives or solid state drives, and obviously you've got the 2 dedicated solid state drive mounts on the back of the motherboard tray, and being a Micro-ATX case, you're obviously not really going to have much more space to work with for storage than that anyway. But if you don't want a water cooled rig or a home file server, and you just want an average gaming rig, something like a H80i, 1 or 2 hard drives or solid state drives, then it's still a decent case for that. I mean, since the original Arc Mini, Fractal Design have greatly increased the build quality with things like the grommets. Obviously they've done a load of upgrades and stuff, things like the tinted windowed side panel rather than the plain one with the fan mount. This front does fit with the fact you can just click it straight off rather than have to pull off the entire front panel, removing the fans, the dedicated solid state drives, etc, etc. Also, special tech say the case is coming in at £70, which is a very decent price for the amount of features this case offers. So I would recommend this case to anyone looking for a Micro-ATX case, and I am kind of in love with it a little bit. And for all the reasons why I said during this review, it has to get the Tasty Award, which is my kind of version of the Editor's Choice Award. If I was going to look and hunt for something that I would change about it, then I would say the CPU cutout could do with being just maybe coming down like a centimetre lower on the motherboard tray, but that is the only thing I can think about. I mean, yeah, I could say if they maybe increase the fan mounts, and you could allow for a Monster 240 in the front, but then you would need a thinner 360. And what would you rather have, a Monster 360 and a 60mm thick 240, or a Monster 240 and a thinner 360? I mean, I'd rather have it like this, with Monster 360 and the thinner 240. And I have to say that I think if Fractal Design are going to make an Arc Mini R3, I don't know what improvements they could make. Like, I can't think of any at the moment, other than maybe lowering the CPU cutout, which is kind of rare for me, where for there not to be at least 3 things that I'm like, that could be changed a little bit. But, so when the Corsair 350D came out, it replaced the original Arc Mini's place for my kind of favourite Micro-ATX case. So I have to kind of talk about, what do I prefer, the Corsair 350D or the Arc Mini R2? Now, if you're looking to just get kind of like a sleek, sexy gaming rig, like I said, something like a HATI and one or two hard drives or solid state drives, then they're both very like good cases, both decent cases to go for. I personally prefer the looks of the 350D a little bit, but then the Arc Mini R2 is £30 cheaper. £20 cheaper according to Special Tech. So it all comes down to, if you are after just kind of, like your average gaming build, which one do you prefer appearance wise? Do you have that extra £20 to spend, etc.? But it's when you want like a water-cooled case or like a home file server where the Arc Mini R2 starts to really excel. Because in terms of water cooling, obviously you can fit a Monster 360 rad and a UT60 240 rather than just a Monster 240 and a thin 240. And also, with this, if you've got obviously the dedicated solid state drive mounts to fit your solid state drives, whereas with the 350D you've kind of got nowhere to put them. And obviously with the home file server here, you can fit 6 hard drives or solid state drives and 2 solid state drives, whereas with the 350D you've only got 5 bays, and only 2 of those can actually be 3.5-inch hard drives. So even though they are both great cases and I do love both of them, the Arc Mini R2 reclaims my favourite Micro-ATX title. Well, I say reclaims, I mean Fractal Design reclaim it through the Arc Mini R2. But that was my review of the Arc Mini R2. I'd love to know what you guys think of the case, if there's anything else you'd upgrade if they were going to make an Arc Mini R3, because there might be some things that I haven't noticed. But if you like the video, hit the like button, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already and you want to see more of my videos, and thanks for watching.